This episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com.
Okay, and you're live.
All right. Should I just start?
Yes, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. This is so great to be here. I just love these regular events where there's so much learning and so much knowledge sharing. And I feel like that's one of the most important things that we can do, because playing an instrument is still this kind of older model in a way that's based on apprenticeship and one-on-one instruction. Sometimes information about how to do this better can be hard to access. So I'm a big fan of these cello chats and super glad to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cicely Parnas, and I am from upstate New York, and now I live in Berlin. Most of my career was dedicated to straight up classical performing, chasing the solo career. And now these days I'm doing less performing and a lot more arranging, composing, special projects, commissioning. One of my passion projects is commissioning pieces. And I have a new commission coming out in hopefully like a week or two. So I'm really excited about that, plus a whole list of arrangements and all sorts of passion projects. So I get very excited about those. So today, I named this talk The Art and Science of Practicing, because to me, that's what practicing is. And I've sort of structured it so that we're basically walking ourselves through this whole process of practicing, starting with simply entering the practice room. And if I'm looking over here, it's because I'm checking my notes. I have a whole list of notes here. So I might be checking that just to keep myself on track. So yeah, we're going to start with that moment when we walk into the practice room. And it really is so important that we start by assessing our mental space. Where are we this day? Are we in a good mood? Are we in a bad mood? Do we feel focused? Do we feel motivated? Do we feel low energy? And for me, I kind of split these into two basic categories. If I'm feeling generally pretty motivated and focused, and I know what I want to do, and I feel good about getting it done, then I put that under the umbrella of problem-solving practicing. And these two categories, I should have said this first, these two categories are inspired by two incredible teachers, Zuul Bailey and Dr. Melissa Kraut. When I asked Zuul Bailey about, what does he think practicing is, he had talked about one aspect being this creative problem-solving sort of thing, and that really resonated with me. So I've got if I'm feeling motivated, I'm like, okay, I'm going into problem-solving mode. If I'm feeling low energy and not very motivated, my other category is I'm spending time with my cello category, inspired by Dr. Melissa Kraut. And by doing this, by having these two different categories, it allows me to enter the space, the practice space, honoring where I'm at, because we are not robots and we will not be able to get into the practice room in the same mood every day and be able to put in the same quality or quantity of work. So that's the first thing that I do. And I will just add to, those days when you are feeling really, really low energy, low motivation, there's this one concept that really changed my life, and it's called the infinite 1%. And the idea is basically that if we have a load of work to do, and there's 100% of this work that we need to get done, but we really don't have the motivation and cannot possibly see ourselves getting 100% of that work done. Just that 1% is infinitely better than doing 0% of the work. And there's also an infinity of possibility contained within that 1% if we can just get ourselves to do that 1%. Because once we do 1%, we might be able to get to 2%, maybe 10%, maybe even 20%. So just giving yourself the space to say, okay, I'm not feeling great. I might only be able to get a tiny bit done, but being able to celebrate getting that tiny bit done makes a huge difference. So there's that. And then I think this also goes along with my philosophy of what practicing is in that, what makes really successful practicing. And for me, one of those elements is really establishing this mind-body connection. So playing an instrument is this really complicated task or endeavor, and it requires so much of our mind and so much of our body. And ironically, actually, I think there might be someone here who I taught earlier today, and we were talking about just this. The humans of all of our senses, we mostly rely on our sight. And sight is actually the least useful when playing the cello. So we have to make sure that we get ourselves into a space where we can gather sensory information from the other parts or from our other senses. So when I say establish the mind-body connection, it means I can really feel all of the parts of my body, so that when I pick up the cello, I can feel, oh, there's a bit of tension there, or that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Or, if I'm relying too much on my eyesight, I might be forgetting to use my ears. And so then I might miss something that's a little bit out of tune. So the way to establish that mind-body connection is really, really simple. It can just be, taking your cello, sitting with it, and just taking a few deep breaths. Could just be that. You could get into it a little bit more with doing a short body scan where you close your eyes and you just concentrate on feeling the different parts of your body. So you might be thinking, okay, I'm feeling the crown of my head. I'm feeling the tip of my nose. I'm feeling my upper back and my shoulders. Feel my elbows, wrists, fingers, hips, legs, all the way down to your toes. And this just gets you really in touch with yourself in a way that will make you hypersensitive to all the sensory information that you're getting when you are sitting down to practice. And then there's, a bit of the warming up physically sort of thing. And I have a couple of stretches that I really like to do. I don't do them consistently. I would always recommend that people do little stretches and warm-ups consistently, especially if you're hitting the practice from cold, literally cold, with cold fingers. I really love to do the prayer hands. I've seen people recommend doing these ones, but I don't like them. They feel a little bit unsafe for my tendons. So I like to do this one. And then the opposite this way, that also feels really good. Or sometimes a little bit of self-massage where you just take your thumb and run it down your forearm a little bit. Feels great. And the other one is taking one thumb and just pressing on the base of that thumb muscle right there. It feels so good. Yeah. And if you are feeling generally cold, it's worth it to just run your hands under some warm water, or take a few stretches or a few high knees or something just to get your blood flowing. Because, it is a physical endeavor and we're using all these tiny muscles and tendons, and we want to make sure that they're healthy and that we can be healthy cellists for a long time. Right. And so this is a little bit of an aside, and maybe I should have mentioned this part earlier, but there's also this way of entering the practice room that can be made a little bit easier by removing barriers. And barriers can be as simple as you're instrument just being in the case. That can be a barrier. So I have actually not here and with me, but in the States, I have a beautiful wooden cello stand that looks like a piece of decoration, but it also has a very, very important purpose, which is that it removes the barrier of me having to take my cello out of the case. And for whatever reason, it really, really helps me just feel like I can sit down and just do a little bit. And that's really, really helpful. Or something like if your space isn't clean and it doesn't feel good to be practicing in a messy space, just keeping it clean can really ease the transition into the practice room. Okay, so now we're going to talk about warming up with the cello. I am really bad at warming up. I don't do, there are some people who have these really strict routines and really thorough routines. And maybe it's a combination of scales and arpeggios and thirds and octaves. And I really don't do those things. I can't. So what I do is I use scales. And a lot of people have asked me over the years, why are scales important? And I remember asking my teacher that question as well. What is the purpose of scales? And of course, most of Western classical music is built on scales. So there is that sort of leg up it gives you when you're working on a piece of music and, oh, there's a scale in it. Good thing I already practiced my scales. I know how this works. But the reason that I really love using scales as a warm-up is that it can be so useful in isolating certain techniques. And I find this even more useful sometimes than etudes, where, I've heard some teachers think about etudes as sort of like vitamins, where you've got a little deficiency in this area. So you find this kind of etude that will help you with your spiccato. But what I find is that sometimes the etudes are actually too hard for you to be able to really, really isolate and focus in on these particular techniques. So what I love to do is pick a technique, in this case, let's say vibrato, and I can practice that with the scale. And maybe I will just demonstrate a little bit of what that's like. So I'm going to turn on the original sound for musicians. Okay, I'm going to grab my cello. So with vibrato, just as one example, there are a million ways that we can explore this. So say, for example, I want to work on vibrato connection, the connecting, being able to vibrate even when I'm changing fingers. So so I can practice that. I can practice the speed of the vibrato. Say it's easy. Actually, I have this problem. My vibrato tends to be a little bit on the slow and wide side. And so I actually have to practice speeding it up a little bit. So I might practice starting slow and then widening. And I can do the opposite also, where I start fast and then slow down. But so that's the general idea. And it can be also used with bow strokes, for example. Say I want to practice spiccato. It's actually what I was saying earlier about etudes. You could find a proper etude that works on spiccato, but it's actually much easier to isolate it and be able to practice it that way. So yeah, I highly recommend using scales in this way. I'm just going to turn the sound back that way. So what it really just puts you so much in charge of what you want to focus on and what you want to learn that day in the practice room. And also that vibrato exercise is really great for warming up in general. starting slow and then speeding up and then slowing down again. It's something that just really just helps you so much with your expressive toolkit. Okay, so that's basically warming up. Like I said, I don't warm up all that much, but that's how I would do it. So now we're going to just really dig into some very, very specific practice techniques. And I picked these ones because these are kind of the most common things that I see in cellists and instrumentalists in general. Some of them are a little bit of a pet peeve for me, where if I'm passing someone's practice room and they're doing this, I might just get a little bit like, I wish I could tell them, stop doing that. So the first thing that I want to work on or talk about is passage work. I am obsessed with passage work. And this is where a lot of times, actually, you'll probably see this over the whole talk, but this is where the art and science of practicing really meets, because there's a methodology. There are sort of prescriptions that you can make for yourself to tackle certain difficult things. But you also have to be in this creative mindset where you're able to take this problem and look at it from as many different angles as possible. So if you're playing something that is staccato, play it legato. I'll have a lot more examples for you. So I also have a document that I would love to share with everyone. And maybe the best way to do that is to share my screen. Will, would you weigh in for a second? Is that possible for me to do?
Sure, of course.
Okay, awesome. Let me just pull up this document. So this is my passage work training guide. That's what I've called it. Okay, working on it, sorry. It is, I can share files. Sorry, I don't use, not only am I on a new Mac and I've never used a Mac before, I'm also on Zoom, which I haven't used very much. Let's see, desktop one. Yeah, I think that's it. Allow. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see this?
I think you might have to confirm the screen share, or we can't see it on our end.
I see. Okay. Okay, I think that might not work actually, because there's some settings that I would have to change. But I can share a document, it looks like. Here we go. There. How's that?
Yes, we can see.
All right, there we go. Okay, got it. Thank you for your patience. All right, so passage work. I have a very specific formula that I go through when I'm working on a passage, and the way that I describe a passage is, a bunch of fast notes all in a row. So the first thing that I do, well, actually, okay, so let me start with this. So much of what we're doing in the practice room is we're actually creating neural networks, right? So when we are learning something new, we're literally creating a neural network in our brain for that specific thing. So we all have our neural networks for difficult passages in every single piece, every note, everything that we do, there's a network happening. And we have to build these. They're not just there. We have to build them up. And that's why it takes so long sometimes to learn new skills, new passages, new techniques. And in order to do that, it requires repetition. And repetition practicing is one of the most dangerous kinds of practicing, because it's so easy to do it incorrectly. So, as I said, we're creating a neural network. And our brain recognizes this network because it's getting repeated. When our brain is exposed to the same thing over and over and over again, it's going to remember it. And this is why it is so important to make sure that your repetitions are perfect or as close to perfect as possible, because our brain it can't tell whether it's good or bad. It doesn't do it. It just knows what's repeated. So that's why our teachers always tell us, don't do the same thing that's wrong a million times in a row. They're right. You're going to have to unlearn it and have to retrain that neural network. The more that we repeat with good repetitions, the faster that neural network fires. And this is the science part. It's actually true. So I've just got a C major scale plugged into this very specific formula here. So when I'm working on a passage, the first thing is that I break it up into groups of two notes. Very simple. And I might do it really, really slowly like that with little pauses. And then I'm going to switch it to the opposite emphasis. So what was the downbeat now becomes the upbeat.
So you may need to switch back to
oh, sorry.
Original sound. Yeah.
Right. Sorry about that. Let's see. How do I do that? Oops. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do that. Let me stop the share for a second. There it is. Okay. Now I'll share screen again. Okay. Is that better?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Technology. It's a mystery. Okay. So, so then we shift it over. And then I move on to rhythms. So long, short, long, short, short, long, short, long. Now, the really important thing when you're doing this is that it's in tune, first of all. So if I'm not getting this, I'm going to spend time with just that so that I get it really in tune. And the other thing that's really important is noticing how your left hand is moving around the fingerboard. Don't use vibrato. This is really important because vibrato changes. If this passage is eventually going to be, then using vibrato changes completely the feeling of it. So what we're trying to train here, and I mean this, we're really training, this is the neural network part, we're training an efficiency into the hand, making the movements small and accurate and efficient. So I'm not going to practice with big movements. I'm going to train it like I want it to be in the final product. So nice and slow and accurate. And this is another thing that I see also with rhythm practice is I'll see students play sort of like a very gentle lilting rhythm. But the way that you get the real benefit out of this is by making this the short notes shorter. Right? So hopefully that's all making sense so far. And so then I have groups of three. And this is one of my favorite ones. So this first one here is what we're doing is we're accenting these groups of three. So we've taken the scale, all the notes are the same, but we're just creating these groups of three. And these accents are really important. So feeling like the only note in the world that matters is the note with the accent on it, and then the next two notes are really, really light and like you're hardly paying attention to them. And then, of course, the next progression is we just move it over one note so that the first note becomes the upbeat. And then as you can see, we move it over one more even. Right? And so if something in here is not working right, go back to the very first grouping of 2 and really make sure it's working. So then we move on to the groups of 3 rhythms. And it's the same idea where we create this grouping and then we keep shifting it over one note. And this is where we're taking this problem and we're looking at it from every possible angle that we can. And I promise if you go through this whole thing here, you're gonna feel like you know this passage like the back of your hand. It's gonna feel so easy. It's just gonna go and you're not gonna have to think about it. And that's what we want. That's what that neural network training is, so that it becomes unconscious. We don't want to have to think too hard about everything that we're doing because it's too much information. So I'll just run through some of these rhythms here just to kind of show you how they work. So with these groups of 3 with the rhythms, and again, making sure that this rhythm is not lilting, but making it really, really sharp. Again, moving it over one, and so on and so forth. So then we can move this into groups of 4s. And I will say also that this is not even exhaustive because there are more things that you can do with bowings. You know, and so I encourage you to just get really creative with this and see it kind of as a template that you can add to. So then when we get into groups of 4s, again, it's just the same idea. But what's interesting, what starts to get interesting about around here at this point is that we're taking these really small groups where we're just, you know, having 2 notes at a time, and we're really thinking, you know, if you think about each note as a movement, that's a lot of movements, right? And we kind of have to think about it that way when we're first learning something. We have to take it step by step, very, very little baby steps. But when we get to around here, now we can start combining these small movements into one larger movement. So when I'm doing this first group of 4, this movement, watch my left hand, it's one movement. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's really a magical part of this. Once you're able to start taking these many movements and pieces and start stringing them together so that it makes one whole movement, it just makes the hugest difference. It's really, really incredible. And that's my other tip for when you're doing passage work, is really making sure that you know what your grouping is and that you're making movements as big as possible. You're stringing these movements together so that, again, it's less to think about. There's not enough time to think about each movement by itself. We have to think about it as, oh, I'm creating a shape. And with this particular scale, you can see my elbow drawing circles. And that's how I think about a lot of this passage work. I'm concentrating on this upper body part here, and then the fingers are moving along with it, but I'm making these larger motions. And by concentrating on those larger motions, it makes it a lot smoother, a lot more even, and just a lot more effective, less to think about. So coming back to our passage work training guide. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory with each one has a rhythm, and then we scoot it over by one. Let's see if there's anything else that I want to show specifically here. I don't think so. Once you get into groups of 5, these are also great. And just notice how I'm repeating the last note of the previous group. So we go on the very bottom line, we've got groups of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So repeating that note is, I don't know, I find it very effective. I really like it a lot. So you can continue on with this. It doesn't have to stop at 5. You can take it to 6, to 7, to 8, depending on how long your passage is. Just making sure that, again, that each of those repetitions is really, really quality. I'm going to stop sharing here. But yeah, again, making sure that each repetition is beautiful and it's the sound you want. It's another pitfall, really, is, you're doing this passage work and you get so focused on your left hand that you forget about your right hand. And as much as we're training in the left hand to do all these fancy things and make it unconscious, we also want making a beautiful sound to be unconscious too. My teacher, Peter Wiley, talked about having a default sound, and, what is your default sound? So if while we're doing all of these exercises, we're also, giving a little bit of attention to just making sure that we're making a good solid sound, then we're also training in to our general playing to always have a good sound. And that's a very, very important thing, I would say. Okay, so we've covered those things, and right, so we've been talking about programming in technical things, and I also want to mention how important it is to also program in musical things as well. When we are playing a piece of music, there's always something happening with it, right? So ideally, no note stays the same. It always has a direction. It's always moving somewhere or moving away. And so what I do, and I find this so helpful, again, inspired by Peter Wiley, whose words ring in my ear all the time, that every situation is a right hand dominant situation. So we so often forget when we get tied up in the left hand and we start playing with the left hand, and we forget that the right hand is really where everything happens. So for example, I'm going to change the sound again. Okay, so we're going to take Brahms E minor as an example because I was just teaching this earlier today. Practicing without vibrato, so important, especially when we're trying to program in these musical things. So what I really am trying to program in is this, it's a choreography of what's happening with my bow. We're talking about the pressure and the speed and the placement and how each note goes into the next. There's a lot that goes into a single crescendo, right? Speed, placement, and pressure, they're all happening in this really beautiful dance that we are most of the time unconscious of. But if we bring that into the conscious in our practice room, everything we will be doing will be intentional. And then when we get on stage, that is what people will notice. People will notice the care and the attention that went into every single note. And it also frees you up mentally. You get on stage and you're like, I don't have to think about doing that crescendo because I've done it so many times and I've programmed it in. And it's really there for me whenever I need it. So I really recommend practicing without vibrato and really programming in the crescendos and diminuendos and tone and all of those right hand things, making sure that the left hand is really light and kind of staying out of the way while you're doing that with the right hand. I'm seeing lots of questions here, which is amazing. Will, should I take a break to do questions or should I do questions later?
I think you can go on with your chat and then we can field questions later.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I'm taking a look at my notes here again. All right, so let's talk about taking breaks now. So taking breaks, so important. Practicing when you're doing it right is hard work. It takes so much focus. I don't know about you, but I sweat when I'm practicing. I get really warm and it's a lot of effort. So for me, taking breaks is really, really necessary. And sometimes it's as simple as just standing up and taking a little walk around the room. Sometimes it's taking a 20-minute power nap. Sometimes it's taking a walk. Sometimes it's TV. Yes, because practicing takes so much brain space. I just really want to turn off my brain for a minute. And it's important to know kind of generally what works best for you. And again, we're not robots. We will be different on different days. So some days when my focus is really good, I'll be able to go at least an hour without even really thinking about it. But it's important to recognize that moment when your focus does start to falter, because it's in that moment that the quality of your practice will go down. So the moment that you're like, oh man, I feel kind of, take a break, stop what you're doing. And know when you're done for the day, know when you're like, oh man, my brain is fried, I've got nothing left here. And, maybe there's room for a little bit of then spending time with your cello where you're just doing slow practice or something that's not too taxing. But yeah, very, very important to take breaks. And also, there's this thing that I think this is a little bit more of where the art of practicing comes in. And this is the getting curious part. So a lot of times we're practicing and the problem is very obvious. It's out of tune, or, the bow hand stroke is not working. And you know that you need to work on that. But sometimes it's not obvious what the problem is. And you're kind of doing it over and over again. And you're like, it's just not quite what I want it to be, but I'm not sure why that is. And sometimes it's subtle enough that we kind of just skip over those areas. But what I really encourage all of my students to do is to move towards those places that feel even just a little bit uncomfortable, because there's a lot to learn from those spots. Sometimes it's extremely subtle, but asking yourself, how do I want it to feel, can be really eye-opening, because sometimes you're playing and you don't really realize that you are holding a little bit of tension, and maybe that's just it. Maybe you just forgot to breathe, and maybe that's what you really need to do in that spot, and just putting a note in your music, take a breath, is enough. But just getting really, really curious about what's going on, asking yourself, how is my hand moving? Am I angled this way? Am I angled that way? What does this part of my body feel like? What does my elbow feel like? Again, this is that mind-body connection thing coming into play, where you're trying to just gain information from all these different parts to understand what is going on. So ask yourself a million questions. Even if you feel like you already know the answer, ask yourself a question. Why am I using that fingering? Is that really the best fingering? What does that do to my hand when I use fourth finger? Oh, it pulls the elbow in. If I use third finger, oh, that pulls the elbow out a little bit. All of those little subtle things make the hugest differences. So that's what I would recommend with that. And so now we're going to move on to the final part which is all about maintaining a healthy relationship with your cello or your instrument, whatever it is that you play. So a lot of people ask me, how many hours a day do you practice? And this is one of the most irrelevant questions you can ask somebody, honestly, because very simply, as you know already, I am very much quality over quantity. So you can be practicing for 6 hours very, very poorly, and it will not make you a better player. Or you can be practicing 1 hour really, really focused, really, really well, and you will get a lot better. So making sure that your goals align with that, that emphasis. So, you know, going into your practice room, don't set a timer on a piece of music that you're working on. Set your goal to be, I want to really figure out this passage. I want to get it up to this BPM, or I want to really figure out the phrasing for this section. You know, making sure that your goals are targeted in this sort of specific way rather than time, because time really means nothing. And the thing is that if you have your timer going, you're going to be constantly checking it, and you're not really focused. Whereas if you have this really specific goal, the time is going to fly by just like that. So so that's really important for your relationship, because the whole point is that we want to get better at this thing. It's really hard. Playing an instrument is so hard, and it's a long-term endeavor. And it can be really, really frustrating. So if we make our practice sessions really effective, we're going to see that progress that gives us that little of reward. Like, I did a good job. I had a great practice session. I figured some things out. I learned some things. And just those little daily wins feel so good, and they keep you coming back to the practice room. Whereas if you're in the practice room and you're just kind of spinning your wheels, it's not going to make you feel very motivated to come back. One of the things that I really recommend is making sure that you always have a mix of long-term and short-term goals. So if you only have short-term goals, you're going to, you know, do a short stint on a piece of music and do it, and then you're done, you're on to the next thing. It can start to feel like, what am I doing with my life? And on the other side of things, if you only have one super long project that could take a year or two or something, you're going to start asking yourself the same question: what am I doing with my life? So always having this mix of, you know, some short-term things that give you that really good feeling of like, oh, I accomplished something, I feel good, I did a good job. That's really, really important. And then having that long-term thing where then you really get to celebrate. I find that to be really life-giving in my relationship with this wonderful piece of wood. And, you know, also learn what works best for you. Learn what is your method? What is your approach? What makes you feel the best? Do you practice best in the morning? Do you practice best in just 30-minute stints, you know, maybe one in the morning, one after lunch? Do you practice best when you have done a lot of other things first, and then you can start practicing? You know, figure out what your schedule is and what really works well for you, because it could be so many things, and so many people are so different about this. Finally, just, you know, really reward yourself when you accomplish something. Give yourself a reward, whether it's chocolate, or you get to go do something really fun, like you go get to see a movie with friends, or, you know, whatever it is that makes you feel celebrated. Make sure that you do that. It's so important. This can be really, really grueling. There's a lot of criticism that we give ourselves, and then a lot of criticism that we get from the outside world. And so making sure that we hold sacred these moments of celebration for ourselves is really, really, really important. And then I just have a couple final things for you that make a big difference for me. And this is also just taking care of your body. When you're playing the instrument, it is hard work, it is athletic, it is physical, and we're doing it for many hours at a time. So I'm going to show you just a few little stretches and things that I do that feel so good, specifically for cellists, and are in themselves kind of a reward after you spent a whole day of practicing because they feel so good. So we went over the prayer hands stretch and this one and a little forearm massage. Those all feel really good. So the other thing that is happening when we're playing cello is, oftentimes our shoulders are raised and, we all work on that, but it happens. We're also doing this for many hours. So, so what I love to do, and you can do this in your chair, is just take one hand and hook it around the bottom of your chair, and then just very, very gently tilt your head to the opposite side. So I'm holding on with my right hand and I'm tilting my head to the left. And you'll feel this really, really nice stretch in here. And you can do that on both sides. And it just feels really great. And the other thing that's happening is we are sitting for many hours. And similar to people with desk jobs, what happens is the front of our hips get really short and tight, and it can make moving around a little bit hard. So I really recommend finding ways to stretch out the front of the hip right here. A really simple way to do this is to just place one foot behind the other and just raise your arms up like this. And you'll feel a bit of a stretch here. And if you really want to make it more extreme, you can start to take it into a lunge and you'll really, really feel it. Again, it feels so, so good. And I'll share one more with you, and I have to grab my towel to show you. So this is just a standard bath towel, and I'm folding it into thirds. And now I'm just going to roll it like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay on the floor, and I'm going to place this right at the bottom of my spine, and I'm going to lay on top of it. And it's called cactusing your arms when you bend them out at right angles like this. So I'll show you what that looks like. So it feels amazing. You might even hear your back crack a little bit, and it will feel very, very satisfying. So yeah, that's the end of my talk here. I hope it was helpful, and I guess now we can get into some questions here. All right, so let's see.
Right, if you can just go from the top.
Absolutely. So our first question is asked by our partners and friends at Together with Classical. If you had to introduce classical music to someone for the first time, how would you do it? What piece would you suggest? Ooh, that is such a difficult question. I think that, one of the ways that one of the most common ways that people use music is to match their mood. And if you look at all of the playlists on Spotify, they're very much mood-based, and people really love to have soundtracks to their lives. So so I would say, what's your mood? And how do you want to feel? And then I would try to find pieces that would match that mood and just kind of show them the power of how different classical music pieces can make you feel, because I think that's really where the power of it lies. And we have a hello from Lubbock, Texas. Hello, Jeffrey. Let's see. Question from Jan T. Do you use some exercises for increasing power or stamina of your left fingers to make them stronger? This is a really good question. So yes, there is definitely an aspect of strength in the hand that we have to have. And I don't have any specific exercises for that, and I'll tell you why. I think that if you're getting tired, if you've been playing for a while, let's put it that way, say maybe a couple years, and you're getting tired while you're playing, there might be something that's not happening correctly in the left hand. Because this is one of the big things that I see with a lot of students is, and this comes from the Suzuki method, and I know I'm setting myself up to get a lot of criticism here to criticize Suzuki method, but what I see with a lot of cellists is they're playing in such a way that they're lifting the fingers straight up and down. And this is a lot of work for the fingers. And they might also be squeezing with the thumb and keeping the thumb just in one place. So you're lifting the fingers straight up and down and squeezing with the thumb, and you've got a lot of tension, and you're just isolating this hard work to these tiny muscles and tendons. And you're going to get tired immediately by doing that. So the way that I think about how the left hand works is that we've got this large weight, which is our arm. Our arm is quite heavy, and we're balancing it on top of the left hand fingers. So the fingers have to be strong enough to support the weight of the arm, but they're not going to be doing this up and down thing, which is the really tiring thing. And there's a Dotzauer etude that really illustrates this very, very perfectly. So if I am keeping my fingers, if I'm keeping my thumb in the same place and I'm just making my fingers do all the work, it'll sound like this. And so on and so forth. And so you're going to get tired immediately doing that. But if you're thinking about transferring the weight, that you're balancing the weight on each finger, and you're allowing this freedom here, then basically what you're doing is you're outsourcing all of this work with these small muscles and tendons to these big muscles that are much, much stronger. So here's how that looks. And so what I'm doing is I'm using this to push and pull the fingers to and away from the fingerboard. And this makes it so that you can do that forever because you're not doing this. And if you do this and watch your forearm, you'll see all of those tendons and muscles bulging and moving and working, whereas this way they're doing minimal work, and that's what we want because they're not really meant to do a huge load. So I hope that answers your question. Just, try not to isolate this to just the fingers. All right. Okay, so we've got question from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this handle, but here we go. Are you familiar with the exercise book, Daily Exercise by Foyard? I don't know if I pronounced that right. Do you know if there are transposed versions of these exercises somewhere, a fifth or an octave higher? I'm afraid it's a no and a no and a no. I'm not sure. I don't know the exercises, and I don't know if there are any transposed versions. But if you're interested in doing that, there's a free notation software called MuseScore, and you could do that yourself if you wanted. So I might recommend doing that. We have, let's see here. We have a comment from Escar. Yes, my piano teacher has been helping me realize that I need to think more actively and train my brain. Yes, absolutely. We're all about training the brain. Question from Sage Cellist. how do you practice phrasings and how to distinguish a phrase from another? How do you do it via visual cues or by breaking a line? By the way, you're one of my, oh, that's so sweet. So how do you practice phrasings? Yeah. How do you distinguish a phrase from another? This is a good question. You have to get really, really specific and you have to make choices. Basically, that's the start of it. And, you know, Bach is a perfect example of this because there's so little input for us in the sheet music. So you really need to become a detective and you need to really dig into the music. I mean, I sing a lot to myself because it really can expose for me how I want the phrase to sound. A lot of times we just sort of do the thing that we want naturally when we're singing because it's such an inherent activity for us as humans. And yeah, so like in the sheet music, write everything down, you know, and always be aware that you might change something later, but make sure you know which note is growing and where it grows to. Know the spot of tension or the climactic point of that phrase. And then where does it go from there? Does it go down? How far does it go? And know where that phrase ends. And again, like some of this ends up being subjective. So if you're really, really unsure, listen to recordings, get some ideas, pick your favorite ones. It is okay to steal phrasing ideas from other people. So yeah, I would recommend just really diving in and treating it like it's a scholarly activity. And what's exciting about that is that's where you become an artist. Becoming an artist is it happens in those choices. When we're just playing and we're not really thinking about what we're doing, we're not really being artistic. But when we start to make very intentional choices about our phrasing, then suddenly we become artists. And I think that's a really cool thing. All right, we have a question here. Can you give some tips on the differences in intonation when playing chords as opposed to playing in sequence? Like rules of thumb that always apply. Yes, I love intonation. I am obsessed with intonation. So yes, I generally use just intonation, the just intonation system on cello. And for those of you who are not aware, you know, there's basically equal temperament, which is how pianos are tuned. And then there's just intonation. And I'll give you some examples of just intonation. So there are two very simple rules to follow when you're doing just intonation. When you are in a major key, the major third is going to be low. So if we are in the key of G major, that means that the B is going to be low. And so we can illustrate this with a chord. So that's a G major chord with a B on top, and it's in tune, but it's on the low side. Another good way to illustrate this is with a minor example. And so when we're in a minor key, it's exactly the opposite. When we're in a minor key, the minor third should be high. So if we are in the key of A minor, that means that C is going to be high. And just to illustrate exactly how extreme this is, so this is in in tune. Let's say I'm in the key of C major right now. So I'm going to tune my E, which is the third, low. And now what I'm going to do is compare that E to an open A, which is just a perfect interval. So what we get is that's how big the difference is when we're using just intonation. And let me tell you, it will take your playing to the next level if you really focus in on this. And so if you're playing Bach, for example, that's a low B. So the first chord is a G major. I'm playing the B low. That's C major, so I'm playing the E low. If I don't do that, here's what it sounds like. And if you can hear the difference, that's fantastic. It really makes the hugest difference. So that's what I would recommend. And you know, I do in many, many cases use that just intonation for scales and notes in sequence, because you know, especially if you're playing with other string people and you're all kind of tuned in and there's a harmony happening underneath you, it just will make everything sound really, really in tune, even if it's in a sequence and not just in chords. So hope that answers your question. Just intonation, it will change everything. Question, let's see. Will this passage work training sheet be available for download? Oh, that's nice. Yes, actually, I've been thinking about doing this for a while. I just wrote this up today for this chat. So as I was looking at it, I was like, oh no, there's a couple mistakes. So yeah, I want to do a more kind of fleshed out version of it. And then I'll probably put it on my website for free and anybody can have it and download it. So I'm going to put that on my to-do list. And if you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I'll make an announcement about it when I've done that. All right. Is that pullover with the loose fit around the elbows for your standard attire for practicing? I've noticed that it's much more comfortable to play in a t-shirt compared to a sweater with long sleeves. Sometimes it feels that the latter can constrict circulation inside of the elbow. Do you have any attire recommendations? That's a really interesting question, actually. I hadn't thought about it, but it's true. This is very comfortable to play in. And I know what you mean. Sometimes certain materials can be a little bit restricting and makes it hard because, you know, we are sort of doing something athletic here. Yeah, I mean, in general, anything stretchy is going to be good. And especially for, I mean, honestly, I've thought about this so many times. When men have to wear suits, I feel so terrible for them. That just looks so uncomfortable. I know a couple people who have been able to find suits that are made of like more athletic wear type of fabric. And so it might be possible to find something like that that just gives you a little extra stretch. And then for me, you know, I have to wear fancy things. And for me, just the most important thing is that I can move freely. So I generally just do things, you know, fabric that has a bit of stretch in it and nothing that's going to get in my way. So no bell sleeves, nothing that's going to be, you know, interfering with the cello. So like no beaded things or things that might make noise while I'm playing. And just making sure that if there's straps that they aren't going to fall down. So I always keep safety pins in my purse with me in case I have to pin something to make sure that it doesn't come undone. So yes, that's what I would say about that. Let's see. Oh, that's such a lovely comment. All right, so we have a question. I'm curious, what is that round design on your cello just underneath the bottom end of your fingerboard? Great question. So my cello is a copy of my grandfather's cello, and my grandfather played on the Rosette Gefriller cello from 1698. And I just played 2 memorial concerts for him, one outside of Boston in Newton and one in New York, and I played on his cello, which was really cool and was the first time that I'd actually played on it. But so this cello is a copy of it. So my grandfather's cello, it's called the Rosette Gefriller because it has a rosette carved underneath the fingerboard. I don't know if you can even see this very well. His is different from this one. So this one is actually carved into the wood. And my grandfather's is actually an inset. So there's like a hole in the cello, and then it's the actual rosette part is made of vellum, which is leather, and a lot of glue. So this copy was made by a friend of the family's in the 1980s, and it's just a beautiful instrument that I'm very, very lucky to play on. Let's see what's next here. Got some really lovely comments. Thank you all so much. Question from the Cello Journey. Do you do the passage work exercise in all keys? How would you recommend we begin this process of learning what is or isn't effective for us? Yeah, this is also a great question. So the passage work guide can be applied to anything. So it's not just for scales. I don't know if that was clear or not, just to make that clear. So for example, I just played Kabalevsky Sonata, and it has this crazy third movement. And it goes on and on like that for a really long time. So I was doing this. And I was going through the whole passage work training thing on that. And it helped a lot. So there are, if I think I understand what you're asking, sometimes, yes, sometimes I actually will transpose something onto a different string, because it will make it a little bit harder. And then when I go back to the string that I know, it will feel easier. That's kind of the funny thing about practicing, is like at first we're trying to figure out how to make it easier for us so we can get a way in, and then we can transition to start making it, how do I make it harder so that the regular way feels easier? So no, I don't do it in all keys. I take it very case by case, and generally just in whatever passage that I'm trying to specifically work on. And then in terms of the process of learning what is or isn't effective for us, it's really trial and error. And this is also the science part, is you are your own experiment. So you need to come up with your own hypothesis or hypotheses about, what you think might work, and notice try something and ask yourself, did that make it better? Did it feel better? Give it, a few tries and be like, no, it really doesn't feel better. Let me try something else. So really taking it just kind of a step at a time. And then, sometimes you really do have those eureka moments where you tried something new and you're like, oh my God, that really worked. This feels so much better. And it sounds so much better. Then that's a tool that you definitely want to keep with you for the rest of your life, because it could come in handy. So yeah, basically trial and error, become a scientist. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. This is a comment from my student. One thing that I've recently started doing on unmotivated days, play a piece that I've learned before and really liked. This has helped reset my mind. That's a beautiful idea. I think that's a great idea. Sometimes, and this goes into like the relationship with your cello. Sometimes it can get so overwhelming, the pressure of like doing something well and getting better. And sometimes you just want to enjoy a little bit and make some beautiful sounds, and that's okay. So that's a great idea. So if you're having an unmotivated day, just play something you really love and enjoy. That's a great idea. All right, let's see. Could you give some advice about playing at the tip of the bow without thumb tension? Interesting. Okay. So, this might be a difficult one, because it might be like I might have to see you play, but let me try this out for a second. So if you have tension out here at the tip, yeah. So one thing that I do that might help a little bit is oftentimes, I see this all the time with students, is we are often holding the bow and we forget that we can put it down on the string. The string can do a lot of work of holding up the bow for us. So a lot of what I do with all of my students is I have them put the bow on the string and just take a moment to tap all of these fingers, including your thumb, and just hold for support with the other hand if you need to. And then just feel like, okay, how much do I actually need to hold my bow? And you'll find that it's a lot less than you think. And so then once you get into this really nice relaxed place, pick the bow straight up off of the string, and suddenly you'll feel all of this tension in all of your fingers and your forearm working, and you'll feel like, oh, that's what I'm doing all the time. I'm really holding the bow up all the time. And so the secret is really to know how to put the bow down, how to let it go, how to put it down without worrying that you're going to drop it, right? So if you're having thumb tension out at the tip, it may mean that you're just holding the bow and squeezing too much with the hand, rather than thinking, oh, how can I get a little bit of my arm weight over here and kind of tilt my hand so that I'm really pronating. And so then you'll probably feel most of the pressure in your pointer finger. And yes, there is a little bit of, the thumb is definitely active, but the biggest thing, my biggest tip, I guess, would be, just really ask yourself, how hard do I really need to hold the bow? How firmly do I really need to hold it? So I think that's maybe the best that I can do without knowing more. Let's see what else we have here. Continued by the same person. Curious how you approach on a bow hold. I'm wondering how I can keep balance of my right hand while keeping any forcing tension away. Yeah, I think I just addressed this question. I think that's really the biggest cause of tension that I see, is people really actively holding the bow and not being able to set it on the string, and just kind of making sure you breathe, lots of breaths. That really helps a lot to kind of reduce tension. And we do have to pick the bow up to do certain strokes, like when we're doing staccato or spiccato, we're picking it up, but then we have to set it down. And that's the most important thing. Let's see. Oh yes, someone is talking about just intonation. Definitely an eye opener. A question: how do you organize your practice when you study new music, especially modern repertoire? It's also a great question. As you know, I don't do it by time. Yeah, I mean, most of the time, I do not have an expectation on myself to be able to get through the whole of my repertoire in one day. Generally, if I'm preparing for a concert, I won't have an expectation to be able to get through all of my repertoire until about 2 weeks before the performance. There are a lot of different ways that you can structure practice around a new piece. I generally think about it in different types of familiarity that we gain when we're learning something new. So there's the kind of ear familiarity where we know what it sounds like, and that makes it a lot easier. So listening to recordings can really get you familiar with it audibly. And then when you're playing it, you kind of already know what to listen for, and that can make it a lot easier. And then there's also physical familiarity. A lot of times when I'm learning something new, you probably have noticed this, where a lot of pieces have like kind of a specific physical feel to them. And so getting familiar with, some pieces are really taxing in specific ways, where you're like, I didn't know I even had that muscle and it's getting tired. Or there are particular challenges. There's a lot of passage work in one particular, so you have to really learn how to make the left hand super efficient, so you don't get tired. And so that kind of physical familiarity can be really helpful and part of the learning process. And then for me, there's the next stage of familiarity is the artistic familiarity, where you just really know exactly what you're getting done musically. And I would say they kind of come in that order, where the first thing is like, I just need to know what notes to listen for. Like, I need to know what notes I'm playing, even regardless of rhythm. And then I'll start to really add in kind of more of the technical things like rhythm and I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Yeah, like knowing, getting those technical things like passage work done, and then I'll kind of be shaping musically a little bit as I'm doing this, and trying to program in some of those musical things as I'm going through that process. So they kind of dovetail a little bit. But ultimately, like, there are certain other techniques you can use, like you don't start from the beginning of a piece every day. Switch up which page you start on different days, so that they all get the same kind of a quality of attention, because as our practice goes on, we start to lose focus. And so by starting at the end, we make sure that gets enough attention at the beginning of our session. So yeah, I think that's what I would say about that. Question by S. Kim. Can you recommend some books or movies that inspired you? If you are thinking like if they've musically inspired me, that's a good question. I really have trouble reading books and movies about music, because I find that it's so hard to portray it accurately, and my suspension of disbelief just goes right out the window very quickly. But yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I read a lot of books about kind of psychological stuff, and that really, really helps me in the practice room and playing the cello and being an artist. So one book that is coming to mind is The Art of Learning. I forget the author's name, sorry, but that book was really, really great, because it had a lot to say about how to learn well. And that is exactly what we're doing in the practice room every single day. How do you learn well? It's a skill, actually. We're not born like knowing how to really effectively, quickly, efficiently learn how to do a new skill. So it's an amazing thing. I also just read Atomic Habits. That totally applies in the practice room, kind of like the infinite 1% that I talked about at the beginning. If you can just improve things by little 1% here and there, altogether, it will make a big difference. It's funny, I have a whole list of books that I read that I love, and I'm not thinking of too many more right now, but I can always have a book recommendation day. All right, another question here. Do you do any stretching exercises before playing? Any tips before starting practicing? Yeah, we did go over that earlier, but just very, very quickly, prayer hands, stretching this way, and then a little bit of a forearm massage. Those ones are going to feel great. Sometimes you can even do a little self massage here because we get so much tension up in here. So just like, oh, doing a little bit of that feels so, so good. And let's see, any suggestions for trills using 3 and 4? So much more awkward than 1 and 2. Yes, that is so true. Yeah, it is tricky. You know, I used to be more of a purist about trills in terms of not using vibrato, and now I'm not so much that way. If you need to use vibrato sometimes, that's okay. I would recommend, you know, just figuring out how to get this really like as loose as possible and small and efficient as possible. And I would do that kind of rhythm practice. And then the other way. It's pretty rare that you have to do it, but if you do that kind of exercise, making sure that you're nice and loose and that you're keeping it really small, it'll get better. Just give it some time is what I would say. Yeah, so I hope that helps. But also sometimes if you have to just give it a little, that's okay too. All right, next question here. What is the ideal or efficient double stops for intonation practice? Yeah, kind of like, if I understand your question correctly, I don't do those types of exercises. Like I know there are people who do thirds as a part of their practice session. I don't do that. For me, it's all about the ear. It's like your ear has to be practicing, right? So actually what I do a lot when I'm practicing is I'm just improvising. I do a lot of improvising when I first get on the cello, and a lot of that is playing some double stops just to open up my ear. So I might do something like, you know, anything like that is just kind of slow and really opens up your ear and gets you playing different intervals and something like that. So that's generally what I do. But yeah, I don't really do exercises so much. Question, let's see. Oh, could you please show us some vibrato exercises to develop a vibrato? Yes, I would be glad to. So, very simple vibrato exercise is just, you know, we've got to understand what our variables are, right? So with the bow, we've got speed, pressure, and placement. What do we have with vibrato? We have the width. So here's wide, and here's thin. And then we also have speed. So fast or slow. Right? So what we want to do is be able to control these different variables, and so we need to isolate them. So and also those were the extremes, right? So there's all the stuff that exists in between on the spectrums. So what we want to do is be able to practice easing into and out of those extremes. So a great exercise is to practice just the width. So we'll pick kind of a medium speed and stick with that. So we'll start thin and then gradually get wider and then back to thin. Trying to keep it the same speed the whole way through. And oh my gosh, it is so hard when you first start doing it. And then the second thing that I would practice is then practicing speed. So we're going to pick kind of a medium width, and we're going to practice slow, gradually speeding it up, it down. And then finally is, making it a little bit practical, where a lot of times what we're doing is we're making a crescendo and we want the vibrato to match what we're doing with the bow. So if we're making a crescendo, we might want to start sort of slow and thin. And then as we crescendo, the vibrato gets wider and faster. And so that's a really effective gesture in music. And so we can practice doing that. We can practice doing the opposite if we're making a diminuendo. So just kind of bringing it into reality with those last two. But that's what I would practice. And if you do that every day for a couple of weeks, you're going to have some major vibrato control. All right, let's see. Oh, hi, Manuel. What do you think about the relationship about working out and playing the cello? Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, so I think that's really, really important. We have to take care of our bodies. And again, what we're doing is athletic to some extent, and it does take some muscles, especially if you're playing Dvorak concerto or something like that. I've done a lot of different kinds of exercise. I've done ballet and rock climbing and running and yoga. And recently, this year I got into strength training. So I'm like lifting weights now, which is totally new. I've found that all of them are helpful in different ways. But if you're trying to choose something that specifically can help with playing the cello, I would say you want to pick things that are going to get you to do the opposite of what you're doing with cello. So we're always doing this with our cello, so picking things that can strengthen the opposite muscles. So if cello takes a lot of back and sort of these muscles, then we want to be able to strengthen the kind of front here. And again, stretching and lengthening. So yoga is great. I love doing yoga. It's kind of a great complement to any activity that you're doing. Just being aware that sometimes you, I forgot to turn this off. Sometimes you might have to adjust a little bit, because sometimes in yoga they have you do stuff that feels a little tough on the hands. So just kind of going with what feels right for you, and don't be afraid to go out and experiment and try different things. I think it's so healthy in so many ways to make sure that you're taking care of your body, and that means exercise. All right, let's see. Oh, thank you. Someone has mentioned this interview I did with Simeon Morrow a while ago, and it was very the most honest interview I've ever done. And yeah, thank you. I'm glad that it resonated with you. Another question here. This is our last question. I know that fingerings are a very personal thing, but do you give yourself liberty to change the suggested fingerings, especially chords in Bach music or other repertoire which are annotated by famous cellists with huge hands? Yes, absolutely. There is no way that I'm going to use the same fingerings as Rostropovich or Piatigorsky or Lynn Harrell. This is crazy. So yes, absolutely change the fingerings as you need to. I pay very, very little attention to pieces that are edited, to editors' markings, basically. I really go try to do urtext or just ignore editors' fingerings and stuff. Sometimes they're kind of helpful, but yeah, you just have to really figure out what works for you. Yeah, okay, so we've got a comment. Since we ran over time, I think we'll skip practice questions. Oh, all right. Yeah, great. Okay, so that's it for us today. Thank you all so much for being here and for your wonderful questions and sharing this love of what we do with each other. I am so obsessed with process and doing this whole thing. And I post on Instagram and YouTube about it all the time. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, the conversation will continue endlessly. And I answer questions a lot on there. And I do also give, I'm not as regular as I would like to be with it, but I also do give often free lessons as often as I can. And I always make announcements about that. So that's it for me. Thank you all so much for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful time in the practice room.